me just introduce myself. My name is Gary Blenner, as it says here on the sign, Blenner for Supervisor. I am running in District 4 as opposed to Jeff that's running in District 3 that I guess includes Sac State. My district, just in case you're wondering where that is, I like how they sometimes refer to my district from the way that it's shaped as the Florida district, because it looks like Florida. Some people actually call it the gun district, and it may be the gun district in more ways than one, because, and I'll do this for your benefit, it is essentially the northern and eastern part of Sacramento County, a very nicely gerrymandered district to keep the incumbent within the district and to give her a certain voter registration advantage among Republicans. So the neighborhoods that my district includes would be Rio Linda, Alberta, Antelope, Citrus Heights, Orangevale, and then it then goes around to Folsom, loops around to Gold River, so they've totally excluded Fair Oaks. Then it goes all the way down to include Slough House, I don't know if you know where that is, way down to Rancho Murrieta. So that's why it looks like this insane district, which again either looks like Florida or looks like a gun, and Gold River would be the trigger. So that's the district. That's the district I'm running in. Let me tell you a bit about who I am. I am a high school teacher. I teach at Rio Americano High School here in Sacramento. So if you were to, for those who don't know where that is, if you were to go back out on J Street and go across the bridge down Fair Oaks, I'm sort of in that area. It's on American River Drive. I've been teaching there for 18 years. And I teach social studies. I teach U.S. history, American government, a bunch of other social science electives, such as sociology, which is what I'm teaching now, and advanced levels, AP U.S. history, AP government, and so forth. And I've, in the past, also been elected to office. For a time, I was one of the 52 elected Greens in California, as I got elected in 2006 to the what is now called the Center Joint Unified School District, which encompasses western Antelope, Alberta, and large parts of unincorporated Placer County. So I did that for 4 years. I actually ran the first time in 2005 in a recall election as a replacement candidate. The way that it works is that if the recall were to pass, I have to come in first place as the replacement candidate. Well, the recall succeeded by a wide margin. They actually were trying to fire the varsity football coach, which freaked out the whole community. And I ran as replacement candidate. I came in second place, but I figured I had enough name recognition to give it a shot in the main general election in 2006. In that race, I needed to come in the top 3. I came in first place. I was very happy with that. I basically owe that, to a very good grassroots organization, but I think also to a very good ballot placement, as I was first on the ballot, and the order was exactly as it was on the ballot. Fast forward 4 years, yeah, it's amazing how that works. You fast forward 4 years, and there are now 5 candidates vying for 3 seats. I'm listed 4th on the ballot. And as opposed to the 2006 race when I listed my occupation as teacher, I listed my occupation this time as a school board member, and I came in last place. So I went from first to last. It was all over the place. I think part of it was as well is because there was a definite campaign against me due to the fact that I was the only board member to stand up for LGBT rights, and that I think. Let me just explain what the controversy was. The state of California recommended, and it gives school boards the option to amend language within their bylaws. They gave us the option to list the topics that were going to be taught in the 10th grade health and safety class, which is a state requirement. And all it did was simply list topics like, LGBT, and then as a separate category, they listed the concept of marriage. Well, you had a bunch of Christian evangelical groups organized, and they came out to try and defeat the measure. On the school board, you have to have 2 votes to change the bylaws. It's what they call first read and a second read. It passed on the first read 3-2, and then on the second read, they were able to swing some board members, including, I want you to know, 2 Democrats, which tells you something to some degree about the direction of the Democratic Party, and swung 2 Democrats away from that. I was the only vote to keep the recommended language as is. So and I had people who were going out and canvassing and knocking on doors in the 10 election, and 2 separate households said that we're not voting for Blenner because he's trying to promote the liberal homosexual agenda. So I know that there was some sort of orchestrated campaign against me, but in any event, I lost in 2010. In 2011, I actually became a board member for the Sacramento chapter of the ACLU, which I hope that's not a harbinger of what will happen in my campaign. I have no idea. But in any event, you all know who I am, so it doesn't matter. So I've been serving since September as a board member of the ACLU, and here I am now as a candidate for the Sacramento County Board of Supervisors. I just thought I'd take a moment to discuss why is it that I'm running, because a lot of times people say to me, Blenner, you're crazy. Don't you know the tremendous odds that are there? You know, why do you need to put yourself through this? Don't you have enough stress in your life as it is? Well, yeah, it's true. But part of what I do as a teacher is to model behavior for my students, and that's a very important quality to have in a high school teacher, and in fact in any teacher, that we are an example. You know, I'm in my classroom the moment, I mean beforehand, I'm there the moment the bell rings, because I'm modeling. It's important to show up on time when you have an obligation to show up on time. So I really believe in modeling behavior, and one of the things I want my students to do is to get more active in politics, particularly at the local level. Because as I mentioned to my students, you know, most of the decisions that affect your day-to-day life actually occur at the local level. And yet it has the least amount of attention for any of the races that are out there. As evidenced by the fact that people just look at the first name on the ballot, nonpartisan race, and says, hey, that's good for me, you know, it looks good, I'll just check that box, and that's it. So, and I tell my students, you know, especially a lot of them who can't afford to come here to Sac State or can't afford to go to a UC system, and they have to go to American River College, which, believe it or not, I've got students of mine who are taking out loans to go to American River College and Sac City College. It's just absolutely ridiculous. I can go off on a whole other tangent now about the student loan crisis that now has more debt. The students now have more student loan debt than they do credit card debt. It's just, to me, absolutely amazing. But the point being that when there is an increase in community college rates, if they can't get the classes they want, or they can't find parking when they want to find parking, who made that decision? It was actually made by the Los Rios Community College District. That wasn't made by Barack Obama or Congress directly. But a lot of the actual decisions that affect people in their day-to-day lives are made by local government, yet it has the least amount of attention. And so I've been telling students for years that they need to organize at the grassroots level. I mean, that is, if you look here, if I can just point to this slide, one of the 10 key values of the Green Party, of course, is, you know, grassroots government, grassroots democracy. If our vision is supposed to work, it has to be sustainability at the local level. And yet it receives the least amount of attention. So I basically model, as I do for my students, and put myself out there to get involved in the local process. Now, why this particular race is because I'm, like Jeff Kravitz was saying, I'm sort of angry and fed up with what's been happening here in Sacramento County for at least the past 8 years since Roberta McGlashan, my opponent, has been on the Board of Supervisors. We've seen several things happen. The two most striking things, that sales tax revenues, or sales tax rates, in fact, have gone up. It's now 7 3/4 or something along those lines, while county services have been absolutely gutted. Meanwhile, McGlashan and Peters, and I would say everybody else on the Board of Supervisors, are completely in the pocket of the people that have actually caused the housing crisis here in the Sacramento area. The land speculators, developers, and others that essentially have robbed this county blind of revenue. Now, let me just explain what the scam is and why they're just so afraid that these two women are going to be voted off in the next election. Because here's what happens. You take somebody like, you know, Doug Osee, who used to be the congressman from this area. This is how he made most of his money, by the way. That he and friends of his would go out and buy agricultural land in the middle of nowhere. And they would buy it at $2,000 an acre, let's say. And then they would turn around to the Board of Supervisors and say, hey, can you please rezone this so that we could go ahead and build a bunch of homes on it? Not to mention whether or not this is smart growth or whether the growth is appropriate or anything along those lines. Nobody stops to ask that question. They're basically going by some plan that they made 10 years ago or longer for the growth of Sacramento County. So we just put that issue aside. If we have time, I can get back to sustainability and growth and so forth. But they basically turn around and say, can you please rezone this? And the county says, sure. So they essentially hand a gift to these land speculators, as I call them, these greedy 1%, you know, the GOP, and basically hand them a gift that they can now sell that land for $40,000 an acre. And the thing is that increase, if I do my math correctly, and you keep in mind I don't actually teach math, but according to my math, that's a 2,000% markup that the county has essentially handed these developers without taxing it. And you actually can't tax that. You can actually say to these developers, for the gift that you're going to make all this profit by building all these homes and continuing all this urban sprawl and everything else, and the fact that the Sacramento County has the 5th worst air quality of any metropolitan area in the country, in exchange for the gift of doing all of that, I use gift of course loosely, but in exchange for giving you that gift, why don't you actually pay the county some sort of revenue in exchange for that, or what I call a developer fee? I mean and in addition to that, what the county does is that if it's out in the middle of nowhere, then you need obviously sewer lines, right? You need roads, you need all of that stuff to make it a sustainable, profitable venture for these land speculators. So who pays for that? It's the county, okay? So not only are we not getting revenue from these land speculators, we're churning out all this money. And so one of the things that I'd like to do is to essentially reverse that process. If development is going to occur, and that in my mind is a big if, because as I said before, I want development in this county to move in a different direction. The developer has to pay the county every single penny for the cost of sewer lines and roads. And secondly, they have to pay the county a redevelopment fee in order to have that land rezoned. If you think this is some loony, crazy left-wing idea, I would like to tell you that there are other counties in the United States that do exactly that. Secondly, this is done in Europe. This is a routine thing that they do at local governments in Germany, for example. So this is not such a crazy idea. And that alone would bring in some revenue that would allow us to essentially restore a lot of the budget cuts that have been taking place. You know, my opponent goes on, and you know, she talks about several things. I was looking at her Facebook ad before I unfriended somebody that so I didn't have to see her Facebook ad. But in any event, he was a conservative board member, so I don't need to see what she said. But the first thing she mentions in her ad as to what is wrong with the county, what she wants to do other than cutting waste, I don't know what other waste she claims that she is going to cut that she hasn't already cut. You know, as if she's thinking that child protective services is a waste, or county health services are a waste, or something along those lines. But the first thing that she mentions is reforming county pensions. So she's basically blaming the county employees union and their pensions for bankrupting the county. And that to me is ridiculous. You're talking about an average salary of the county worker at less than the national median income of family households. So she's basically saying, and she has the nerve to say, they're the reason why this county's going broke. And if you look at her campaign contributors, everybody's like the who's who of every crook that robbed this county blind. So that's why they know that if myself and Jeff Kravitz get on the county board of supervisors, that the whole jig is up. I mean, it's ridiculous. My opponent has raised $100,000, all from land developers and everything. Simply because they know, again, that if she's off there, that this policy is not going to continue. So people have said to me, well, you know, how can you say that you're going to restore all of these services? Well, it's a matter of priorities. And that's exactly what I mean by we have to go after where the money is. That's the first thing. The secondary thing is to do something about the foreclosure and homelessness crisis that we have in Sacramento County. I don't know if you're aware of this now, but in California we have, and I think it's true in Sacramento County as well, we've got more standing inventory of buildings and homes, empty homes, than we have people that are homeless. Right. It's just absolutely insane that this is taking place. And I want to ask, what is Roberta McGlashan and Susan Peters and the rest of the crowd, what I like to call the Board of Supervisors, what are they doing about the crisis? One of the things that I propose to do is, first of all, I think, and I'm sure if Jeff were here he would agree, as San Francisco has done, to officially go on record and call for a moratorium on foreclosures in Sacramento County. That's the first thing that we ought to do. Now, we don't have the authority to say no more foreclosures, but we do have some tricks up our sleeve to essentially make foreclosures more difficult. And what you do is that you impose a very stiff foreclosure fee, because the banks have to go to the county and say, okay, you know, record this and you know, do the paperwork and have the personnel to stand there on the county steps and sell the home. We can make that process a lot more monetarily difficult and force the banks to essentially renegotiate deals with people to keep them in their homes. We can restore the services that have been gutted by the state of California and locally here to help people that are homeless. You know, people are homeless for, you know, they could be kicked out of their home. And by the way, people can be homeless and not sleep on the streets. They could be staying with friends and family. A lot of young people after they graduate from college are moving back in with their parents. I don't call that necessarily homeless. I call that the near homeless. You don't have the ability and the resources to sustain yourself. There are people in this county who are living in motels, in Motel 6, whole families living in there. And these are people that are Roberta McGlashan's constituents as well, and she completely ignores them. So we have to restore the services to help those people as well as those that are, let's say, have some sort of addiction problem, okay? The county used to have a lot more money for that. Because again, the people that are homeless or near homeless are the people who can't sustain themselves in a home because it's too expensive, or people who have an addiction issue, or people that need mental health services. And that is, again, another thing that has been gutted. There was only one county health clinic operational and available, and from what I understand, it only has like 2 to 3 full-time staff. You know, the other thing my opponent says that she wants to protect is public safety. She's very friendly with the sheriffs and the police and everything else. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing necessarily, but I don't think that the police should have any better or worse consideration in budgetary items, because there's other public health safety things as well, such as the county health department. You know, God forbid we have some sort of epidemic and we're up the proverbial creek without a paddle. I mean, it's a very terrible situation. That is an element of public safety as well. So again, McGlashan says, I'm going to reform pensions, I'm going to cut waste, I'm going to, you know, provide public safety, which she hasn't done any of that. You know, when I ask you, and I'm going to wrap up here and ask for questions here in a moment, but you know, I ask you, why should we continue with the same failed policies for the past 8 years? Why should we give either of these women another 4 years to be in the pocket of special interests? It totally defies logic. So that's one thing I want to do. I want to protect the environment. I want to put people before profits, and I want to allow small businesses the incentive to grow in Sacramento County. So at this point, if you have any questions, I'd be very happy to answer them. Yes?
So I've definitely noticed the impact of cuts to county mental health, and in fact, a cousin of mine was schizophrenic and homeless and committed suicide because he had no care. So what do you think can be done in terms of county mental health services?
Well, I think one of the things is that if we could cut some of the, we could raise some of the revenue that I've talked about. Another thing, another means of, you can do one of two things when you have a budgetary crisis. You can either cut services, you can find a way to raise revenue. I want to do as much as I can to try and raise revenue. One is to go after the developers, to go after the banks, but also to impose a vacancy fee for those commercial real estate ventures that are sitting empty. And to create the financial incentive to allow people to lower their rents so that they could actually continue in their business. Out where I live in Antelope, for example, there is a strip mall in which there's only one donut shop. And as I've said before, you know, there's a reason why I know this, because I go there. And unfortunately, and in the same strip mall, there used to be a Chinese restaurant, and I used to go there as well. And then all of a sudden, it just suddenly disappeared. And I saw the owner on the street one day, and I said, "Hey, you know, what happened?" And he said, well, you know, all of a sudden a new landlord took over and they massively raised the rent, and he said, I can't lower it, and we just closed business. It was like literally almost within days. So you want to create a situation in which people will open their businesses and also create sales tax revenue, and also increase the property values as well to bring money into the treasury. We can also cut administrative waste. I have a proposal to reform government by making the Board of Supervisors a part-time institution. They make nearly $100,000 a year. And I'd like to know for what, because we have entire states with populations bigger than Sacramento County. I think Colorado is one of them, where the state legislature in Colorado meets like 60 days every 2 years. So I'd like to know what they're doing for all of that money. So my proposal is to cut their salary in half, you know, so they're only making, pity me, $50,000 a year, which is the national median income. Let them know what it's like to go out and get a job in the real world and save the county $250,000.
All right.
And then once we start to have a policy like that where we put people before profits, then we can start to funnel the money into services like that. And that's sort of what I want to do. Yes?
Helping develop small businesses, but also Green's particularly interested in cooperatives and cottage industries.
Yes.
Is it possible to have like a loan program?
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely.
Loan and-
I absolutely support that. See, my philosophy is, Jeff was talking about the whole arena deal. The county had to vote its portion of that, and all 5 of them voted in favor of it. Had I been there, I would have said absolutely not. Because here's the thing, if you're going to give money to multimillionaires like the Maloofs, and you're going to use taxpayer money for that, then you ought to make the same thing available to somebody that wants to open a flower shop in Orangeville. And that to me seems to be the ultimate fairness. So, I mean, if you're going to have that much money to essentially play around, you need to make that available to people. And yes, we could definitely develop programs like that where people can go and form cooperatives and so forth. There was one, when I was going around seeking endorsements, and I was endorsed, I think it was for the Rainbow Chamber of Commerce. They asked, what were you going to do to encourage Fortune 500 companies to move to Sacramento? And I said, absolutely nothing. I said, why can't we build the strength of what we have here and build our small businesses and make them grow? That's sort of what my goal is. So, that hopefully answers your question.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have a question.
Oh, no, there's someone else, sorry.
Real quick, I love what you're talking about, and the idea about restricting rents for businesses, is really important. It's generic. It's a problem all over the country. I'm really curious how, what would be the mechanism for that? Are you thinking of sort of a rent control board, or what? How would you hold back this ever climbing rent thing that small businesses have to face?
I think the idea, it would be sort of along the lines, I think, of supply and demand. If we can prevent people from raising the rent too high by having a vacancy fee. So in other words, if the business suddenly goes out and it's vacant, you have to now pay the county a certain amount of money. Now, we have to have certain safeguards in there, like, what if some developer decides, I'm going to rent it to my nephew for $1? No, you have to have a business in there that generates X amount of sales tax revenue. And I think that if you have enough of that, the rents will eventually begin to stabilize under those circumstances. Yes?
And I'll just kind of follow up on the co-op thing. Would you be in favor of looking at or making incentive for small corporate-owned businesses
Oh,
in
yeah.
town
Right.
to convert to co-ops and worker collectives?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, and make some kind of incentive so that would, so we can keep the money locally,
Right.
keep the people making decisions.
Absolutely. I definitely
I
believe.
think that's going to be a really important thing.
I think, again, if you go back to this whole idea of I keep pointing here, like I do in my class, I just sort of point. If you go back to, community-based economics as one of the 10 key values, that's absolutely something I want to try and empower people with more democracy, with more direct democracy, and a co-op is a really good way to do that. Any other questions? Yes?
Yeah, so I'm thinking about from a community organizing perspective. We were talking about teaching and how you model for your students, thinking, because I used to want to be a teacher, and then I realized I'd probably get fired for teaching that kind of thing. So my question, it's kind of related. How do you, and I think it's related to politics as well, my question is about framing and organizing. How do you, I don't know, maybe you could just speak a little bit to framing, because I think that sometimes messages get lost because people don't, what they're hearing doesn't appeal to them, either because it's not what they're used to hearing, and just use this.
And how do I frame?
How do you frame, yeah, and I don't know if that's
Right.
related to your teaching, like how do you frame stuff so that you don't get, accused of
Fired.
being a communist and being fired? Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure I'm accused of that anyway. No, because I've had former students of mine that are conservative, and they're friends of mine on Facebook and so forth. And one of them actually said to me, "Blenner, are you a communist?" And I'm like, I'm not going to answer that. But when I'm there, I mean, I generally, we have in the state of California standards that we have to go by. I can go off on a whole tangent about what the problem is with, child left behind, the standards and everything else. But generally speaking, I'm not there to have it be Blenner 101. I'm there to basically be as neutral as I possibly can. But on this particular issue, I have a local government project where I have students who, as part of the project, they have to actually shadow a local government board or agency. They actually have to attend at least one meeting, and they have to do a whole report on it. 5 things did you know? What are their sources of funding? Because I think that since in California, American government is not a state-tested course, and I don't think a lot of teachers put emphasis on that. That's my way of getting students involved. And I stand there and I say, and I don't think that I'm being overly partisan when I say you need to get involved in the local process. Dwight Eisenhower said that local government should be everybody's part-time hobby. So he's a Republican as far as I know. And so I mean, I use that quotation and I just basically say, you need to get involved with the grassroots, whatever it is. So that's sort of how I do that. I try to keep, there are times where I do say, okay, this is my opinion on things. And then there are things I read in the textbook, it's like, this is just blatantly wrong. And so, for example, when, they say things like, Ronald Reagan, ended the Cold War, and things like that, and I'm sorry, a child of the 80s, I have to say, now wait a minute, here is another perspective. Okay, I will say, Ronald Reagan, some conservatives will say this about him, but here's what other people say, and I give the argument that he prolonged the Cold War. He did not sit down with Brezhnev or any of these other leaders, and he refused to accept a nuclear freeze and all of this other stuff. And if you look at what Gorbachev has said in his memoirs, that they felt that because of the fact that Ronald Reagan was not willing to negotiate, that they had to keep building more weapons. That we could have ended this much sooner, not long after Gorbachev. We could have ended the whole Cold War in the mid-1980s, or possibly even earlier, if Ronald Reagan had been a bit more amenable to some sort of an agreement, but he wasn't. So I give that view as well. So you just basically have to, give both sides of the issue and allow students the ability to, that's, another value is, people have the right to speak their mind. That's what democracy is all about. So I am way over my time. So I appreciate it. Thank you.